All right, we are live. Jim Rowley, welcome to the future of fitness.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And we just had you on the Athletech Unscripted series in January, I believe is when we recorded. So, there's a lot of great information there about, how Crunch is doing, your forecasting for 2024 specific to the gym industry. And, we're not going to cover a whole lot of that today. I'm sure it's going to come up. But I'm most excited about what you're most excited to talk about, which is leadership. And to give people a quick, introduction, if they don't know who you are, you've been in the industry for 32 years. You're the CEO of Crunch Fitness. We're over 460 locations now, which is you're an 8-year Marine veteran. You did a combat tour in the Persian Gulf. You've worked with a guy who people may know, Mark Mastrov, in the past, and some of the portfolio companies that you worked with Mark were. I was reading this list, not just Crunch, but Hard Candy, Yoga Works, Crunch Australia, Steve Nash Fitness World, Chili's Energy Fitness, Alex Rodriguez's Energy Fitness Mexico. Like, man, you've seen some things in this industry.
Don't forget UFC Gym.
UFC Gym. It's right there. Well. Yeah. Great. Thanks for the reminder. So point is, Jim, you've seen some things, you've done some things. So let's get into it. Leadership. Okay. Do you have a specific philosophy or framework that you go off of when you're running these companies?
I do, and I don't deviate much from it, to be honest with you. And look, most of which I'll share with you today, I either learned in the Marine Corps, I've learned along the way in the fitness industry, or I've borrowed it from other really successful leaders who've written books, or I've gone to their presentations and so forth, and I've picked up on some things and I'm like, that aligns perfectly with my philosophy.
Awesome.
But I mean, one of the things that I think that stands out is when you talk about great leaders, I think number one is that they have to have a vision, and the vision has to go beyond what are we going to do today, this week, this month, or this quarter, right? You have to be constantly looking at your business, I think almost years ahead, to try to anticipate things, especially in the fitness business, anticipate trends, anticipates the expectation of the members, anticipate competition, things like that. I think you have to be results oriented. This is a sales business at the end of the day. It's a service business at the same time. We try to keep our members for as long as possible. There's a lot of things we have to do that. But it's a results oriented business. I think you have to be innovative. I think in order to be an entrepreneur or a leader at any level, you've got to be courageous. And this whole idea behind the buck stops here, and I'm the last decision maker, and so forth. I wouldn't say it's 100% of the time, especially if you surround yourself with a great team. But a lot of the time, the early mornings and the late nights, you're the one making the decision, and that takes some courage. But it also takes integrity. You've got to have a lot of integrity, and you can't always chase the almighty dollar. That is not the way to run a successful business. And finally, I'd say that you've got to lead by example. And one of the key elements of that is you've really got to be a practitioner of emotional intelligence. You can't be somebody that is flying off the handle all the time, a hothead, just because you're chasing sales goals and budgets and EBITDA and profit and everything else. You can't be a maniac. You've got to be a good human being as well. So those are some of the traits that I try to live by and try to counsel my team on to have the same ideology.
Yeah. I think as we're starting to get into this, maybe I want to get some more context on this. So when you look at your 32-year career within the industry, what are some of the milestones of leadership for you where you felt like you really were challenged and you grew? Like, is there any particular stages that you kind of identified over those decades?
Every single time I got promoted to my highest level of incompetence, right? So when you go from being a sales guy to a manager, you've now reached a whole nother level, right? When you go from manager to district manager to vice president to senior vice president to president to CEO. I've made every leap. I started as the rookie sales counselor, right? I had a phone book and a rotary phone. I had to call for leads out of the white pages. So every time I've advanced, it's a new level of incompetence. And you don't necessarily have to reinvent yourself, but you have to recalibrate. And the calibration is really, okay, in order of magnitude, the priorities don't generally change, but the geography might change. The number of people that are reported you might change. You might be taking on marketing and legal and HR and tax and FP&A and strategy and all these things. So hopefully you're putting arrows in your quiver along the way, and you maintain this theory of being a student, constantly learning, so that when you get to the highest levels, you've prepared yourself. So I think preparedness is a big part of it. But look,
Yeah.
I've kept a library. I have kept a library all along the way of things that I go back to and either use as training or reminders or whatever it might be. But yeah, every time I got promoted, I was incompetent.
It's really funny. It actually reminds me of my first management job. I was like 24 and I was promoted into managing two people. And I was a young man. I was managing two young women, and it was a disaster. I had no idea what I was doing. It was really, really hard. I'm like, how do I even get them to respect me? They didn't respect me
Right?
when I was doing, and it was very challenging. I mean, is there anything specific, like when you look at that your history in this evolution of your career, right? Is there any one or two times when you're like, okay, that was a significant challenge that maybe I wasn't prepared for, and then you had to adapt, through different ways?
No, no. I was raised by a Marine who was raised by a Marine, and I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps. So when you think about overcome, adapt, and improvise, I mean, that's just in my DNA. So there's been challenges along the way. Most of them have been personnel challenges, to be honest with you, dealing with different personalities, different capabilities, inabilities, things like that. But look, the reality is there's only three types of teams. So I work in the team business. You've got teams that are incapable, teams that are capable, and teams that are highly capable. So whatever you're inheriting along your promotion cycle, that's going to determine the challenge. If you get a highly capable team, the challenge might be, how do I keep them motivated, and how do I keep them executing at a high level? If you get a capable team, how do I incrementally make them better? And if you get an incapable team, are they worth me training and developing, or do I have to turn over the entirety of the team? But that's normally what the challenge is. The market conditions are the same, competition is the same, pricing, marketing, all those things are the same. And if you have a moral and ethical compass that you live by, you're not deviating much from yourself. So then it's really just ascertaining the ability of the team.
When you have gone through these promotions, when you kind of look at the new landscape of the job that you've been tasked, is there like a system or a filter that you look through? Okay, I've just got this new role. This is what, do I need new personnel? Do I keep personnel? Do I need new technologies? Like, how do you start to filter like what that vision will start to look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing is I remind myself, and I've got this written on my wall: no one is coming. It's up to you. Right? No one is coming. It's up to you. Right? So if you're looking around corners to see who's going to come help you, that's the first thing you have to erase. So I always talk about this too with my teams, that on Sunday afternoons, when my children were small, my children are all adults now, but when they were small, so church is over, all the sporting events over, things are coming down and calming down in the house, and they're preparing for the week ahead. Around 4:00, 4:30 in the afternoon, I would take an hour and a half, and I would go into a quiet space, usually in my office, and I would just be very prescribed as to what I wanted to accomplish the next week. Right. So that's something I did. I practiced that for a long time. And if I was taking on something new, I would be very focused on what do I want to accomplish near term, short term, and long term. And and those plans change sometimes. I would modify them, but I would stay very oriented to what I wanted to do. But when I would evaluate a team, I would say, okay, what are their technical and tactical proficiencies? Right. And the only way I would do that is to be in the field. You cannot do what I'm talking about from a spreadsheet. You have to be a field general, and you have to have in my opinion, this is just my opinion, right? You have to have the ability to know what the best practices are in the field. So I was always check technical and tactical proficiency. You have to have the ability to anticipate that things aren't always going to go perfectly. I don't think you're worth your weight in salt if you're not a culture builder. So you've got to build a culture. So that really comes back on you. Are you a person people can get behind? Right? Do you have the ability to inspire, encourage, and motivate? Because if that's not in your DNA, you should hire a lot of people that have that ability if you're just a visionary, right? I think you have to lead with intention and you have to lead with intuition. And most importantly, and I'll never forget this, this is not my saying. I learned this from someone who I worked for. He said, Jim, it's not always your responsibility to have all the right answers, but it is your responsibility to know what questions to ask. That has resonated with me for decades because knowing the questions to ask shows your proficiency in what you're evaluating. So when you ask those questions, it usually helps lead you to the answer.
Nice. Um, Culture, you brought that up, and that comes up a lot with leadership roles and how you do it. I mean, I don't know where this quote came from, but it's always stuck with me. Is like, I guess maybe they're talking about the Yankees. Like, culture is what happens in the locker room, right? Community is what happens in the stands, right? Like, there's a separation. I think a lot of times people get mixed up between culture and community, and are we a family? Are we not a family? There's a lot of different styles of leadership. So what is, like, when you talk about culture, it can be an ambiguous term. What does it mean to you when you talk about culture, and what ways do you, I guess, maybe tactics and how you create a solid culture with your team?
Probably the most powerful question that I've ever been asked. And it's intimate in many respects. It's overused, right? I think Peter Drucker said it best: culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what does that mean when you break that down? If you haven't built a system of highly capable individuals that believe in the mission, they believe in the vision, they believe in the purpose, they believe in the leader, then you haven't built a culture. And you can have the best strategy in the world, all the marketing dollars and everything else. But if you don't have that belief, which is what happens in the locker, you don't have that belief when you're driving leads and guests into the gyms, specifically for my industry, you're not going to have people that can deliver the cultural experience that you're trying to communicate now to in the sales process, right? So this notion of we're one big family, welcome to Crunch, we're one big family. I don't subscribe to that. We're a big team, and our team has got an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, a special teams coordinator. We've got specialists, right? So we're a team of highly specialized people who have the ability to inspire others, to motivate, to encourage, to teach. And another element of our culture is we try to always remind ourselves to be kind and to be fun. If you can do that right, who doesn't want to work for a company that's growing, crushing in the business, kind, fun, inclusive, with a no judgments philosophy, right? So our values, our core values, our mission statement, our purpose, our vision is aligned around this culture. When we deviate from it, it's problematic and it's not authentic. So you have to be an authentic leader at the same time. So we press very hard to stay true to our mission.
Awesome.
Are we perfect? No, because we're in the sales game and we have private equity partners and they have expectations and we have competition, and that creates challenges. And sometimes you have to turn up the heat, and sometimes that heat comes across as working against the culture. But even if the culture is one of inclusiveness and kindness and fun, it still has to perform, right? So that's the whole idea behind, the culture that you build. It still is built with expectation. It can have all the words that feel good, but it has to come with this idea of expectation. And that comes from your ability to inspire, encourage, motivate.
Jim, outside of Crunch, when you look at cultures for different companies or organizations that you really admire, ones that are doing it right, is there anybody that comes to mind?
I don't know. I've never worked for them, so I don't know what their true enterprise culture is like. Like, what's it like in the boardroom? What's it like in the management meetings and so forth? But I could tell you at the front line, in and out is impressive because of what they're able to deliver. The experience that they deliver does not deviate whether you're getting a cheeseburger in Los Angeles or Los Alamos, right? It doesn't change. So there's a level of repetition associated with that, and it doesn't degrade. It doesn't degrade from where you go, and that's got to be something that's either in the training, in the culture, in the DNA, in the management team somewhere. And if the culture was really screwed up, you would think it would disintegrate as you went down the line. It doesn't. So, but again, I've never sat in their boardroom. I don't know what their conversations are like. I don't know how they treat their executives. I just know what the consumer experience is like. Nothing else really comes to mind in terms of, wow, that culture is amazing, because it's really hard to sit from the outside and say, oh, that culture is amazing. Well, if you're not in the boardroom, you don't know what it's like. It could be it could be like a terrorist organization in there, but they fake it till they make it on the consumer side.
I'm thinking about this if I'm another executive or leader and I'm looking at my culture. Is there any early warning signs, red flags when your culture's going the wrong way? Things that maybe if you picked up early, you could fix.
Well, I think any leader worth their position, right? So if you are the leader, the founder, the owner, whatever it might be, I would ask four things. Are you self-aware? Because if you don't have self-awareness, you're likely going to have probably a gap between what you think your culture is and what the actual culture is, right? I think you have to, and self-awareness is, how do I feel, right? How do I feel about my culture? And then you've got self-regulation, which is, what can I do? What can I do if I need to round some things out or square some things up? And then you have to have situational awareness. How do others feel about my culture? And that's usually a hard question for leaders to ask, which is, okay, I'm going to get the opinions of my team. I'm going to get the opinions of my team members down the line. And then finally, situational regulation, which is, what can I do, right? So it's, how do I feel? How do others feel? What can I do about self-regulation? And then what can I do about situational regulation? That feels heavy sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes people just want to sell and gross and hit the numbers and everything else. I go a little bit deeper and I think about these things, and they're heavy on me. And again, I'm not perfect, but we ask our members and our team members for insight. We get consumer insight and we get team member insight so we can regulate. And sometimes that feedback hurts. And it says that we're not doing all the things that we need to do. But I think it's critically important. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what comes to mind to me is you've got to be self-aware and you got to self-regulate.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, there's always insights in this stuff. And as you look at your career too, as a leader, you're going to have to do hard things.
Yeah.
Right. At times. Is there anything that sticks out in your memory of times where I was like, that was really freaking hard. I didn't want to do that. I had to do it. It hurt emotionally. It hurt other people. Like, maybe give us some examples of how that went and how you got through it.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things just came to mind. One is, I've had a failed business. I've had a business that didn't perform well. It didn't resonate, and we lost money, and that's painful. And you've got to be critical of yourself to understand, why that happened. You still have to be resilient. I talk about kind of these 5 things that are necessary. You've got to be resilient. You've got to be present. You have to be confident. You have to be grateful, and you have to be hyper-focused. And sometimes you can do all those things and that business still doesn't work, right? You can have everything we've talked about in the last half an hour and still it doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't resonate with the consumer. You missed the mark, whatever it might be. So when I've had a failed business, it's been painful. But probably the things that have humanly touched me the most is having to let go of people that I really liked, like good human beings who worked hard for a long time, who just finally came to a point in their career where they weren't effective anymore, and they weren't going to be able to do the things that were necessary going forward. And when you have to look at someone who you really like, if you're a culture leader, right? If you've done all the things we've talked about and you've built this thing the way that we've talked about it, I don't want to reiterate it, but if you've done all those things and then you're sitting in your office with someone that you're going to terminate, that should be a painful feeling. If you just build culture on paper and it sounds good on podcasts, and you have no relationship with that team member, then it's not a painful experience, right? But when you're letting someone go who's been proficient for a long time, but their proficiency is, they've been loyal for a long time and that's maintained, but they're just not the right person going forward, that's painful. And that I've had to do that on 2 or 3 occasions, probably more than that, 3 to 5 occasions where they were memorable, they were important, they were difficult, and each time it was the right decision. Each time.
And how do you go through that? I mean, I brought a little context from my own experience. So my dad was a dentist. He owned his own business in San Jose, California, which I know you're from the Bay Area. That's where I grew up too. But I remember at a young age, like when my dad had to fire someone in his office, it was hell in our household all week. Like, you know, he would wait till Fridays. He would just be emotionally distraught because he was very caring, very, you know, he treated his staff like gold. And when he had to do it, even if it's someone maybe who wasn't performing well or had done something, he still had a hard time doing it. So when you go through, like, how do you steel yourself essentially to do something like that? And do you have any like ways to do it, or you just, as soon as you make a decision, you just call him up or get him in your office and do it? Like, is there any way that you approach those hard moments?
Yeah, I probably wait too long because I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I coach and encourage and create, you know, new strategies to see if they can meet the new expectation. So I give people, I think, more of an opportunity maybe to where when I come to the final conclusion, it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's like, okay, I started to go through kind of this, you know, listen, watch, and learn, right? Listen to what's being said, watch what's happening, and then you'll learn a lot. And then I'll give them a second opportunity. And if I still don't see you, I mean, generally when you're arriving at this conclusion, it's a foregone conclusion, right? But as a human being and somebody who's leading teams, I want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. But once I've arrived at the final conclusion, I don't hem and haw. You know, we make the decision, and I try to make the decision. I think about the timing. I think about kind of where we are on the calendar. Like, you know, these are things you want to do around New Year's and the holidays and so forth, right? And I think about, is there a caring? How would I want to be let go? Right? I would want a full explanation of why. I would want some financial consideration if I've been there a long time. I would want you to be thoughtful of the calendar, like your dad on a Friday instead of doing it on a Monday, you know, things like that. I wouldn't want to do it around the holidays. So I just kind of apply, you know, by the way, the golden rules almost work 100% of the time in leadership. Treat people the way that you would like to be treated.
There's something that keeps coming up in like my business career, the coaching and mentoring that I've done along the way. And it is like, you have an organization, you've had people who have maybe been there with you from the beginning, right? But as the company evolves, things change, right? And there's an adage wherever it comes, you know, people who got you to where you are not the people who are going to take you where you need to be. So when you look at like someone maybe who's been with you for a long time, but they're not quite up to snuff for where this company needs to go, are you trying to find the right person for the role, or are you trying to find the right role for the person? Like what comes, where do you sit on that paradigm? What's more important, the people or the role?
I mean, I think it's, if you've got the right person and they've got high versatility, you can identify the role. You can even cater the role to the person. But look, I've had this happen in the last 24 months where I've had to come to the conclusion that the team I'm running with has done an amazing job getting us to where we are. Amazing. They've outperformed the expectation, but they've hit the ceiling. They don't have the next gear, or the business is moving so fast they can't keep up, or their pace of life has changed. They just reached a point in their life where the pace of how they want to do things has changed. And I'm still running, you know, a sub 5-minute mile, and they're running 8-minute miles, right? It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're capable and that they're not intelligent. It's just the pace has changed. And yeah, I've had to, in the last 24 months, I've had to do that 2 or 3 times. And I don't necessarily call it upgrading the talent. Sometimes I call it top grading the talent, where it's just a lot of different people are very smart. They bring a different skill set. They bring a different mannerism. They bring a different lens. What they hear might be different, and it's refreshing. And I think you have to do that. You know, I've read, I think, every book that Jack Welch ever wrote. You know, Chainsaw Jack Welch. Imagine getting you can't choose your own nickname, right? Imagine your nickname is Chainsaw. And he wrote something that I will never forget in my life, that your best leaders, your best people have to have an edge. And in order to keep that edge sharp, right, you've got to be a practitioner. And sometimes people let their edge dull. He said you have to have energy. You have to bring the energy. You have to have the ability to energize. And finally, and most importantly, you have to be able to execute. 4 simple things, all starting with the letter E, that are impossibly amazing to me. Edge. Sometimes we call it X factor, right? Edge. Energy. The ability to energize, to get the system going, and finally to execute on your goals. Unbelievable. The simplicity behind that and the perfection behind that by a studied CEO who ran some of the biggest companies in our country, right? But he was also the one who said, you know, every year you got to cull the weak, right? You got to cull the herd. You got to take 10 to 20% out, right? So it's I don't know. I share that with you with enthusiasm because I think it's possibly smart to be able to boil down into 4 things that are critically important to success of any business.
Yeah.
When you're building teams, anyway.
I've never heard those, and they're awesome. I mean,
how
if you look at
reacting to what I just shared,
I have more questions, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how my mind works, right? Like, out of those 4 E's, what do you think is the most rare or hardest to come by?
1,000% the ability to execute. I have been surrounded by strategists and tacticians who can't execute, right? I have seen some of the best laid plans that don't do anything. The ability to execute is number 1, paramount. You know, sometimes not to be crude, but I just say the ability to get shit done. That's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a difference too, from my experience, of people who can just get shit done and people who need to follow a framework. Like, some people just intuitively will be resourceful to get it done. And that's a quality that is really hard to come by from my experience.
But have you ever met anybody who's got a bit of an edge? Like, a little mysterious. They got that X factor. They walk into a room, they walk into a conference, they're leading a team, they can engage people, right? They just got that edge. But they also bring this energy. They're a source of energy. And it's so dramatic that they can energize other people and get the whole system going. And finally, they hit goal. They execute, right? When you see those types of people, it's amazing.
Yeah, I could feel your energy and excitement when you find these people.
I try to live by those standards. I try all the time, and you know, the downside is it takes a lot to be full of energy and an energizer, bring that mysterious X factor edge, and execute. You are going to dedicate your life to whatever your mission is, and there's going to be, like, I'll be honest with you. I woke up this morning. I was on fire yesterday. Like, I was just having a day. Today, the batteries were a little low when I woke up this morning, and I just had to look in the mirror and say, "Hey, suck it up, Buttercup. Let's go. We got things to do, right?" So back to that self-regulation, back to that self-awareness. You know, do I call and cancel the podcast 3 hours because I woke up with low energy? No. You march on. You made a commitment, and plus I like talking to you. So, but you have to ask yourself that stuff. And I hear about it all the time. You know, leaders who are like, "Oh, I'm tired. You know, it's been a long month or quarter or whatever. The same people that ask for more responsibility, more titles, more pay are the same ones generally that are like, I'm burnt out, right? So I don't know. I'm off tangent now, so I'll bring it back to center here. But yeah, the 4 E's are amazing.
Yeah, I mean your energy's up now, Jim. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. Well, look, you got to be the spark, right? If you want to be the culture builder, you got to be the spark. You have to.
You can't be passive.
And if you're not, if you are self-regulating and self-aware, if you're not, and that's just not in your DNA, find someone who's got it. Let them be the spark. You be the vision. It's okay. You can be the guy behind the curtain or the girl behind the curtain. It's okay.
And in a slight pivot, I wanted to ask you this. I wrote it down in my notes this morning. I feel like now in today's day and age, there's more focus on the difference between the generations, whether you're millennial or Gen X or boomer or whatever it may be. I don't even know all of them. Gen Y is somewhere in there. Is that something that you notice and then kind of factor into how you work with people, or do you think it's a bunch of hogwash?
No, a little bit of both. I think there are some core differences. Look, I was born in 1967. My parents were born in the 40s. Their parents were born in the, whatever, teens or 20s. So depending on what era you grew up in, I think from kind of the Great Depression through the 40s, 50s, into the 60s, there was this mentality that you get a good job with a company that has a pension and you stay there for 20 or 25 years, right? So that's how, I've got kind of a Depression era mentality. I've only had 2 jobs in my life. I've been a Marine and I've been in the fitness business, which makes me a practitioner and hopefully a perfectionist when it comes to my practice. But so I kind of grew up with grandparents who, both of my grandfathers retired from the Navy 20 plus years. And then both of them oddly went into corrections, like prison corrections, and both of them retired as correctional officers. So they were triple dipping. They got their Navy pay, their state of California pay, and then they got their Social Security or whatever it was. So that was kind of the mentality. I don't know if that was right for me, just to be just singular in that, but I've stayed in the same industry for 32 years. I think today's young team member, whether I'm Generation X, then it's Y, then it's Z or millennial or whatever it might be. I don't think that they believe in the latter. I don't think they believe in staying for one company for 20, 25 years. I think it's more a circuitous route. I think they have expectations around open communication. I think that, I grew up in a world where you didn't talk to the CEO. Like the CEO wasn't talking to the frontline employees and so forth, right? There were executives below him creating a layer, and there were executives below her creating a layer, and they were and then there was field level, and then the field level created a layer to the front line, right? And there were all these layers, chains of command, right? And you didn't speak to the top. Today's team member doesn't get that. They want access to everybody and everything. They want all the knowledge. But I'd say in terms of what's really changed is the leadership style, kind of between 20th century leadership and 21st century leadership. And I think 20th century leadership is the mindset was I know the answers. And 21st century leadership is they know the answers. So we've shared the information and we prepared them. And then 20th was I tell them what to think and do. And 21st is more I set goals and teach them how to think about achieving those goals. So there's more of an I mentality in the old school of leading versus a we mentality. It's we over me is a way, kind of think about it. And I think that the old school was about disempowerment, obedience, short-term gains, and even managing with fear, with a heavy hand, right? All those things. And now it's more about, empowerment, self-motivation, it's inspiration, pride. So that goes back to what we started with on the culture side. You and I grew up probably in a culture where you were obedient, you were subservient, you ran the play, you did all these things. That is not today's employee. If they're feeling that, they are leaving you in a heartbeat. So I think it's much more around what I shared, which is, long-term improvements, empowering the teams, allowing for self-motivation, providing inspiration and pride and recognition. That's another big part.
Yeah, interesting. This has come up in leadership all the time. I think a lot of people have different opinions about it. But as like the at the top, right, at the CEO or the founder or this, even if it's a small business, right, and you're the owner and you have several employees, is it lonely at the top? Is a question that comes up, right? Because sometimes you feel isolated, and especially when we're making these hard decisions, like having to let someone go. Like, do you feel that it's lonely at the top, or is that something that is maybe just an overreaction to new leaders?
Such an interesting question, right? Because for the long time we heard this. It is lonely at the top. The buck stops here, but all these things.
Mhm.
And then in order to be interesting or to write a new book or to have a new theory, you need to be counter to that opinion. It's not lonely at the top. You need to surround yourself with the right people, but it's not lonely. Like, I'm not looking for companionship in my business. If, I fill the void of loneliness with my wife of 28 years and my children and my friends and family, right? So I don't look at business as being lonely. Like, I've never been like, I'm so lonely, right? Is it quiet? Yes. Are you alone with your thoughts and decisions? Yes. Does it create more pressure to have to make not only the final decision, but you damn well better make the right decision? Absolutely. I sit in this office 7 days a week. I look at my stat reports. I look at my strategies. I look at my vision. I look at my dashboards. And I look at I'm already working on 2026. I'm working on 2026. So I have to anticipate where my business is going to go domestically, internationally, with my franchise owners, what the member expectations are going to be, what the team member expectations are going to be. We're executing things now in 2024 that we worked on in 2020 and 2021. My business cycle is evolutionary. There's a flywheel here. So when I'm writing things down, and I'm very contemplative, and I still write things a lot, right? So I still use the old pen and paper, and I journal things, right? So, and I build decks, crunch decks, right? I'm always testing these theories, more crunch decks over here, right? And then I'm making notes, and am I doing that with my entire team? No, I do that in isolation. So there is a level of isolation to that. Then I bring it to my team. And I say I've got a flat organization. My org is flat. So when my executive team is in the boardroom, they can all have opinions. They can all weigh in on what I may be bringing to the table and so forth. And then I'm going to ask them to bring things to the table. And then who's ever got the best ideas is the one that's going to lead it. So, yeah, you're alone. This is what works for me. I can't say that anybody who's listening should be doing the same things. I'm just telling you what works for me. So it's evolutionary. And I've got very capable executives who can't do what I just described. They can't. They can't sit in isolation and come up with new ideas. And they definitely can't write a strategy and a tactical plan that's going to lead to execution, one of the 4 E's. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean they're bad executives. It's just that's not who they are. They can run the play, but they can't write the play.
It's a really good segue into one of the more kind of final topics I want to get with you is how do you keep your edge as a leader? I mean, obviously, CEOs pretty well compensated, right? So that's nice. That kind of helps you stay motivated. But the stress, right? The time, just the grind of it all, right? And how do you maybe on a daily, weekly basis between managing your health, managing your mind, spirituality, like all those things, how do you keep your edge sharp to continue to show up for your team and your company and your brand?
I don't rest on my laurels. I've made more money than I ever dreamed of. I didn't even dream of the lifestyle that I've been afforded, but I work like I'm paycheck to paycheck. Like, I don't I don't work less today than I did when I was broke. It's the same mentality. It doesn't change. It doesn't be like, oh, you know, you've got all this, you've got money in the bank and your kids are set up or whatever, and you go on nice vacations, work less. Like, how does that even, like, I don't get that. I just don't get it. Like, my work mentality today is the same as it was in 1992. Grind your face off. It's going to come to an end at some point where I've got to just start to enjoy the achievements and so forth. But I'm still pretty hard on the grind side. I'm a person of faith, so that helps restore my mindset. I do take vacations. In the last 15 years, I think I've only taken 1 2-week vacation. I'll take 7 days or maybe 9 days or whatever. I listen to my body. I do Pilates twice a week, which makes me stretch and bend and focus. I lift weights 3 days a week, which is an outlet for me to be able to exhaust the demons. My kids are very restorative for me. They're adults. When I spend time with my children, it restores a lot. It fills my cup. My wife and I have been dating since she was 17 and I was 18. We've been together for 40 years, married for almost 30. So there's a lot of things in my life. And then I've got hobbies. I've got outlets. And those things are restorative as well. So probably not the greatest example of all those things, but I try to have a multitude of things that can be outlets for me that are restorative in nature. But I also love my business. I love it, right? I like doing what I'm doing. I like my teams. Oh, here's the other thing. When I'm feeling like the office is weighing 1,000,000 pounds on my head, I go to my gyms. And that's amazingly restorative to get out with the front line and see what's happening and talk about all these things. I meet my member. I talk to them like, how are we doing? And that can fill my cup, right? So yeah, that's probably the other thing and guess what? One of my team members reminded me of that. She worked for me for years. And I called her probably 10 or 12 years ago. And I was like, I just don't have it anymore. And she's like, when was the last time you were in the gym? And I said, it's been a couple months. I've been grinding. We're doing this. I'm traveling all over the place. She's like, you're at your best when you're in your clubs. Get out in your clubs. And that reminder changed my life. It changed my life.
Last question, actually second to last. And then I know you have a busy morning here, but how do you start your day? What does that look like?
I get up. And this is probably not a best practice, but I check my emails to make sure nothing burned down overnight, right? So my office is in New York. I live in Lake Tahoe, so I'm 3 hours behind my office. So there's usually a relatively significant amount of catch up to do. So I'll catch up on that, and then I generally start with a cup of coffee. I'm not a massive coffee guy. Like, I didn't even have my first cup of coffee till I was probably, I don't know, in my 40s. But I like to have a cup of coffee in the morning. And then I watch Fox Business. I want to see how the market's doing and not just because of my stock portfolio, but you can get a lot of intelligence, like consumer intelligence. What's happening with credit? What's happening with debt? What's happening with interest rates? What are people talking about? So I like to stay informed on that. I generally work out in the middle of the day. I don't work out in the morning. So, and then I'll just jump in and go right to work. So 6:30, 7 o'clock, I'm hitting emails and then I usually poke my head up, around 12:30, grab something to eat real quick, and then I go to the gym. And I'll get an hour and 15 minutes, come back, and then work the rest of the day.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you look great, man. You really do. So here's the last question. As a community, as an industry, how can we help you, Jim? What would you like to hear from people about if they want to reach out to you? And and then where would you like them to go?
Well, I mean, they can go to LinkedIn. I probably is the best place to find me, and you can send me an email there. I've got Instagram and everything else, but I don't even know what my handle is or whatever they call it, so I couldn't even give that. I would give you my mobile phone number, my email, but the problem is some people who listen to these podcasts just want to sell me shit, and I don't necessarily want to get sold, right? So LinkedIn's probably the best place. My email's out there. If anybody thinks, that they want to send me a message or they want to share some insight or have a question or whatever, I'm going to Ursa next week. I'll be on the floor next week at Ursa. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but I'm relatively accessible. But I just don't want to be deluged with, people who can send me more leads and send me all these new people that we can hire. And like my email fills up every day with every solution I guess I've never thought of, So anyway, just poking fun a little bit. But look, I appreciate the time. You guys are good guys, and I have a lot of respect for what you do. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And this won't air before Ursa, but I will be there. So hopefully I'll run into you and we can share a beverage or something like that. So thank you, Jim. I know you had a busy day, so I'll let you get on to CEOing. And this is awesome conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Rowley.
Thank you.